Hello, my name's Eric and welcome to the Big Man's Outdoors. In one of my last videos I had a comment from a viewer by the name of Jiminico, and sir, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your username. The comment was along the lines of wanting more information of my process and the equipment that I was using. So I felt obliged to make a video in response to that. I am getting ready to do some more 224 Valkyrie reloading, so I thought I would document the process as I go along. That being said, the first thing I do after collecting my brass from the range is I decap it. I have a Lee universal decapping die that I use to punch the primer pockets out. The press that I use is an RCBS press, it's RCBS Rock Chucker. This is a press that I grew up with. It was one that my father had as long as I can remember. I don't know exactly when he got it. I never did ask him. But it's one that I always remember him having from when I was a kid. I remember when I was wee little, he had it in the shed outside, and during the summer times and whatnot, I would remember him being in there. I'd wander in and see him reloading. So one that I had used when I was excuse me, dealing with a cold at the moment. As a teenager, when I would reload as well, I would reload for the 308 and also the 300 Winchester Magnum, both rifles which I had used deer hunting. So I never really got into the details of reloading that much when I was at that age. It was more along the lines of my father saying, here's the brass, here's the powder you use, here's how much you use. He showed me how to do it, watched me do it, and that's how I reloaded. So that was something that I enjoyed doing even at that age. It was just something that seemed really fun and enjoyable, and the ability to make my own bullets was something I liked. So that's what started me into reloading. I got away from it for a while. I just never made the time to do it, and I never really cared that much for accuracy. I would, as I was deer hunting, rifle hunting, I would just buy factory ammo and could always, get good enough groups for deer hunting around here. And I knew I always wanted to get back into it, so I always saved my brass. But once I got the 224 Valkyrie, that was a catalyst that kind of threw me into reloading again. So my father had gotten out of reloading. He still had this press, so I asked him about it, and it was handed down to me. So I do love the press. A lot of history for me, and it's just, I guess it's a family heirloom at this point. So that being said, my first step is to clean and decap. Oh, after I decap, I clean, and I clean with a mixture of hot water, a little bit of dish detergent, some vinegar, and some salt. I just mix it around by hand or put it in a container and shake it up. I do know there are some videos going around out there. I'm thinking I want to make it a more automated process. I know 243 Outdoors has just published a video in the last week or so recently talking about a Harbor Freight, I think, rock or stone tumbler that he's using to wet tumble. I think Loads of Bacon also has some videos or a video about that as well. I'm sure there's more people out there who use it for wet tumbling. So I think I'm going to look into that and make the process a little bit easier for me. I don't have to sit there and shake it or mix it around by hand. But that generally works for me to clean the brass for what I need. It doesn't get, sparkly shiny, but it is clean. The next step that I do is I resize the brass and then measure it for case overall length. I initially started out using Lee dies, and they work great. I still have them, but I wanted to, and I'll talk about this more as I get into bullet seating, but I wanted to have a little bit more control over the seating depth. So I bought a set of Hornady custom grade dies, specifically for the ability to put the micrometer on the bullet seater, which is what I wanted. Like I said, I wanted to get very precise about seating depth and have the ability to know when I turn it how far. You know, I could have figured that out, but this just made it easier. I also wanted to take advantage of the Hornady rebate as well. So I bought the custom grade die set, and I used the Hornady resizing die because I've got the ability to take the decapping pin out. Obviously, when the rounds get to this point, they are already decapped, so I don't need that extra piece sitting down there. That's why I don't use the Lee die. The other thing that I've done to this die and also my Lee die is I've taken the expander out and polished it a little bit. I took it down to about 0.221 inches, or 221 thousandths of an inch. I wanted to be the bullet diameter for the 224 Valkyrie is obviously 0.224. I wanted to take it down to try and give me 2/10 of neck tension plus, 2/2000 of an inch neck tension, plus I added another 1,000th. I think I'm there. Not 100% sure there, but I'll check that as I get into dealing with neck tension more. Right now I crimp. I use the Lee factory crimp die that came with my Lee Pacesetter die set. Again, that was the first set that I bought and used. So I'm still crimping, but I wanted to do a little bit of polishing on the expanding piece of the die. So I resize, and at that point, like I said, I also, and I don't remember if I said it or not, but I measure for case overall length at this point. I am not trimming my cases at this. I don't have the equipment yet, so I'm not trimming, but if I'm under 3/1000ths of an inch of the case overall length, I'm okay. If not, I put that piece of brass aside. I've got a bag of brass I need to trim. I'll get to that at some point. So I then measure for case length, and then at that point, the next step is I deburr and chamfer. And that's when I really pay attention to the case and inspect the case itself. I constantly look at the case as it's going through the different stages up till this point, but it's more of a quick glance, just as an overall batch. As I'm deburring and chamfering, that is when I really look at the cartridge itself, or the case itself, to see what it looks like. I use the RCBS deburring and chamfering tool. It's what came with this set when my dad bought it. He bought the whole set, so this came with the press. This is what I use. After that, the next step that these rounds are ready to do is for me to clean the primer pockets, brush the case mouth, and then at that point I also use a swage gauge to check the primer pocket to make sure that it's not blown out. So I am ready at this point to move on with these. These rounds need deburred and chamfered. So I will take you along in the process as I get these rounds loaded up. This will probably be a longer video, so if you stick around, I appreciate it. And I guess we'll come back as I move through the process. Okay, deburring and chamfering is completed. I am now cleaning the primer pockets. I have a Lyman primer pocket cleaning tool that I use, and then on the other end I have a brush, so I just give the primer pocket a quick clean, smack it, and then stick the brush in the case mouth to make sure I get any of the excess brass that came off from deburring and chamfering out. I will check these with the swage gauge, but I don't do that until after I have cleaned all the brass. So step number, I guess, 4 that I use. Brass prep is probably one of my least favorite things to do in the whole reloading process, but it is necessary to do it. So we will continue on and get these primer pockets cleaned, and then we will come back when we start to use the swage gauge to check the primer pockets. Alright, I will check back in a bit. See you soon. The one thing I didn't talk about initially was annealing the brass. I didn't anneal this brass. This is twice fired Federal brass, but I will end up annealing it before I shoot it the next time. So this will be the 3rd firing, 3rd reloading. So before I reload it the 4th time, I will anneal it. And that step would happen after the cleaning is done. Decap clean, and then I would anneal it at that point prior to resizing. So I just wanted to throw that out there as I'm going through this, and also trying to make sure that I'm covering all the steps in my reloading process. So again, next step is to check the primer pockets after I'm done cleaning them, and we'll come back and hit on that in a bit. Talk to you soon. Okay, I am in the next step of my load process, which is to check the primer pockets. I'm using this Ballistic Advantage swage gauge. I think it's Ballistic Advantage, but swage gauge, to verify that the primer pockets haven't blown out. I have 90 pieces of brass that I am going to load. I don't know if I've said that so far, but up until this point, I'm better than halfway through. I think I got, what, 5, 10, 15, 20, 29 left, and I've only found one that is going to fall out because of bad primer pockets. So, having just posted the video on the Hornady Brass Life factory brass, this is considerably better results than what I was getting with that brass. I do have one here that is just starting to go in, but I don't not load it until the primer, the no-go gauge, goes the whole way in. That's got one more firing left on it. In my experiences, that one will probably fall out in the next firing. I also realize that this is probably not the most efficient way to check my brass, because I'm already halfway through the reloading process before I start getting rid of pieces of brass with bad primer pockets. But I want to make sure that the primer pocket is clean before I check it with the gauge. That way there's no grime or anything in there that might be impeding the no-go gauge. So I will continue on with checking these. I'm almost done. I need to get my load development sorted out and figure out, like I said, what primers I need to lay out, how many of which particular round get primed with what, and then we will continue on. So check back in a bit. Appreciate you hanging around. We'll see you on the next step. Alright, I'm on to the next step, which is priming these cases. I use the Lee Precision hand priming tool. I used to do it with the press, but I just like not having to fiddle so much with the individual primers. Just dump them and get them set properly in the feeding tray, and then go ahead and just use the tool to do it. I'm using Winchester small rifle primers at the moment. I do have some other primers I need to use, but Winchester's what I've started with. I always check whenever I prime to make sure that the primer is not protruding out of the pocket past the base of the case at all. Winchester small rifle primers tend to feed well in this tool. The one thing that I always need to make sure of when the primer drops before I stick the next shell in there is that the primer is indexed properly, it hasn't flipped or anything. Some primers are more apt to do that than others. namely CCI primers. I've probably had more primers flip and either go in sideways or upside down with CCI primers than any one. And I think it just depends on the tool itself as to, you know, the primer and the tool and all that. But I don't know. All in all, I think I do like hand priming with the tool as opposed to using the press. I think it speeds it up a little bit more. Just my opinion. So I'm going to finish priming these. Well, like I said, there's one that popped down sideways. When that happens, I just knock it out and reset it back in there so that it's properly indexed. But yeah, you got to make sure that that doesn't happen as you're priming, where you get a primer in sideways or backwards, like that one. So I'm going to go ahead and finish priming these, and then we'll come back when I start talking about throwing powder charges. Alright, I'm ready to start dropping some powder here. First, let's talk about what I'm going to load. I'm loading up some of my warm-up rounds, let's call it. I got I think 5 of these Hornady 75 grain boat tail hollow point match. They're not the ELD match, they're just, you know, regular 75 grain match bullets. I'm going to be loading them up over Varget, and I'm going to use 25.5 grains of powder to do that. The other ones I'm going to load up after that are the Barnes match burners. But again, these are just my warm-up rounds, just to verify my zero, to make sure that when I'm shooting over the chronograph that I'm getting readings, things like that. The equipment that I use, I have a Lee Deluxe Perfect Powder Measure. I use it to drop the powder charge. I then measure it on the Hornady G2 1500 battery operated electronic scale, just to check it and get it in the ballpark. And I'm going to start that so it warms up. I have a Hornady trickler that I mounted on this little piece of wood so that it's up and can trickle into the electronic scale as needed. And then once I measured on the electronic scale, I verify it on the Lee safety scale. And then after I have verified my charge, I put it in my case. First thing I always do when using the safety scale is I check my zero on it. I always make sure that I've got a 0 to begin with. Let's go ahead and do that while that's warming up. I also like to calibrate my Hornady scale as well, just to make sure that it is doing okay. So I'm going to do that as well as it's warming up. Alright, the safety scale is zeroed good. The one thing, a modification I made on the safety scale, is I bent this hanger so that when it hangs, the spout faces me. I think initially it was hanging like in this configuration. If the scale was like this, it would hang in this configuration, which I didn't like. I wanted that to kind of face out to the side so I could pour the powder in the side without having to worry about the metal piece that was holding it. That was the way the RCBS beam scale was that I initially used. So I just liked it better that way. Let's see. Oh, I turned that off. Let's calibrate that. 0. Let's double check that. Okay. Scale. Calibrate. Alright, well, that's calibrating. I will put my powder in my hopper here. Some words of advice are only ever keep one powder on your bench at a time so that you don't mix powders up when you're trying to put them away. Ask anybody who's ever put the wrong powders in the wrong container. It's not cool. Alright, so that is calibrated. We are at 0. We are at 0 here. Let's go ahead and set out 25.5 grains of powder. I always like to write my loads, my load data on my dry erase and hang it so that I can always have a quick glance at what I'm doing. The other thing I like about the beam scale is you set it and you don't have to worry about it. Like this, if I'm in the process of reloading with just using the digital scale and I think about the wrong number, there's no double check. I don't go through all this process when I'm reloading for pistol. I do reload pistol. When I'm reloading for pistol, I just use it. I just check the charge on the Hornady scale, maybe one every 4 times. I'll double check it on the beam scale just to make sure. But when I'm loading for the rifle, I want to be more precise. So that's there. I want to see how close my initial powder drop is to 25.5. Also lets me adjust. That was 27.6. I'm dropping way too much powder. Also lets me put some in the hopper for trickling in. So let's decrease this a bit. See where we go with it. 25.7, we're getting closer. Drop it back to 2 clicks. And see where this gets us. Alright, that's 24.5. Let's go, or 24.4. Let's put a little bit more in the trickler. And let's get our powder out. Reloading's all about getting in a rhythm. Once you get your rhythm going, things tend to move a little faster. Yep. Alright, that says 25.5. Let's check it on the beam scale. Throw another charge while we're waiting. 25.6. I prefer to have the powder come out of when I throw the powder charge, have it be low if I need to trickle. I prefer to trickle it up than try to sprinkle it out. Okay, so that looks good. And we just wash, rinse, and repeat for this process. So we'll go ahead and get these charges thrown here, and then we'll move on to the next step, which is bullet seating. See you then. Okay, I'm to the point where I'm ready to start seating bullets. I have my die preset. Again, I'm using the Hornady custom grade die for the 224 Valkyrie, and I have just the regular seating stem in there, not the VLD seating stem, because these aren't VLD bullets. I do like the micrometer adjustment on here because it allows me to see when I make an adjustment how much I'm adjusting. It's pretty accurate as far as that goes. I have this preset to not crimp. I believe you can do a roll crimp with this die, but I use the Lee factory crimp die, so I don't crimp with this particular die. And I believe in order to do that, if I remember correctly, you have the shell in the casing with the ram all the way up, you crank the die down until you can just start to feel the top of the bullet touching the die, and then go back a full turn, I think. But like I said, this one's already preset for the 224 Valkyrie. I am going to be loading these Hornady 22 caliber 75 grain bullets. Again, these are just my warm-up bullets. So I'm going to go ahead and make that happen. One word of note: make sure whenever you move your case holder around, you don't bump it, because you can knock powder out. I've done that in the past where I've had everything loaded up, smacked this, and heard powder fly, which isn't good, because then you're not sure what is actually in your case. So anyway, enough about that. Let's go ahead and get these seated. I have this backed off quite a bit because I want to load these at 20 thousandths from the lands, which for me is a base to ogive of 1.76 inches. So I go ahead and put a bullet in and partially seat it, and then let's make sure my calipers are zeroed out, and then I measure the base to ogive and then make my adjustments from there. So I'm at 1.860. I want to go 1.76, so I've got a whole hundredth of an inch to go. So I can make those adjustments here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And now I should be on to my base to ogive that I'm looking for. 1.759. So perfect. Just double check my overall length. 2.17 is what I'm shooting for, and I've got 2.171. So that's good. I will go ahead and try it again. And I do measure every round that I load for the rifle to check its length, because I'm anal like that. So that's 1.765. That one's a little long. I will set that one off to the side for the moment and do another one and see where that one gets me. 761, which is acceptable. So I'll finish these and then come back and hit the ones that need adjusted at the end, because I don't like to constantly adjust back and forth. .757, so that one's 300 short, which is acceptable. Okay, that one's good. One more of these. .7625. I might shorten that one a little bit. I like it to be, if it's going to be over, I like it to be over by maybe only 1/100th of an inch. So that one's good. Let's hit this one again. See where we are. Yep. 766. Drop it 5/10. Or sorry, 5 thousandths, 5/10. 76. Alright, there we go, 1.761. So I'm going to move on to the Barnes match burners. and load them up, and then we'll come back and talk about crimping. Now we're going to crimp these rounds. Again, I use the Lee factory crimp die. I have it set. The way I set it is I crank it down with the ram up. I screw the die down until it touches the shell holder, and then it should be another half turn. That's a little bit double check. Okay, touching the shell holder, half turn, yep. And that's where I'm set. And that just gives me a light little crimp on the round itself. At some point I will probably play around with neck tension, but I've just been crimping for now, and that just adds another variable that I don't want to deal with at the moment. So run it through, feel the crimp. The other thing that I didn't mention that I do after I've thrown the powder charges and I'm getting ready to start putting the powder in, or sorry, seating the bullets, I actually look at every bullet to make sure that I see powder in it. I don't want to put a bullet in on top of an empty case. So that's one thing I did forget to mention in the process. So I will go ahead and crimp these. And I do appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, it's going to be a longer video, but this is just my reloading process from beginning to end. Again, just to show you the equipment that I'm using, my process, how I do it. Everybody does it probably a little differently, I've found. Ultimately, it's what works for you, I guess. Everybody's got their own process. You just kind of pick and choose about what you do as far as, you know, things along the process. Everybody may inspect things a little differently. Everybody might throw powder charges a little differently. Some people crimp, some people don't crimp, so on and so forth. But again, hope you enjoyed this video. Until next time, I appreciate you watching. This is Big Man's Outdoors, and have fun outside.